So, hello and welcome to Fuel Poverty Action series of monthly learning sessions, Fuel for Thought from Fuel Poverty to Climate Justice. Fuel Poverty Action is a group of ordinary people fed up with being robbed by greedy energy companies through spiraling bills and rip-off prepayment meters. We campaign to protect people from fuel poverty. We challenge rip-off energy companies and unfair policies that leave people to endure cold homes. And that means that we take action for warm, well-insulated homes and clean and affordable energy that's under the control of people and communities, not not private companies. And as for this space, Fuel for Thought, it's where we come to share research and lived experience, tranquilize and clear up confusion as we ask and answer questions with experts, activists, and campaigners. First up, for introducing our first speaker who's here in the room with us, I have some words to share with you from one of our directors, Ruth, who very kindly did a little recording as she can't be here today. Can you all see that? Yes, wonderful.
The word of the moment is unprecedented. Everything's called unprecedented. And it's true, this is clearly the end of an era. It looks like being the end of the American empire, and it's looking like the end of everything we've taken for granted. Or I should say, some of us have taken for granted, because some of us have been lucky enough to enjoy a certain level of peace and comfort, while the world hasn't really been like that. Obviously, a lot of the world has been living with hunger and war and multiple holocausts over the centuries, including slavery. So you could say there's nothing new. But what is genuinely new now is what's happening to the climate. And this year, that's clearer than ever. And of course, we still don't know how bad it will get. They used to say, cherchez la femme, look for the woman. Whatever's going wrong, there's some story with a woman behind it somewhere. Well, we should really say, cherchez the oil. Climate change is from oil. Wars are for oil. Oil hoovers up the world's resources through bills, through government subsidies, through the military, and then it uses the money it sucked up to hide the fact that oil, and of course gas, part of the same story, oil is the source of the problem. Oil wars use oil and increase profitability of oil and multiply the impact of oil on the climate. But this time, with the Strait of Hormuz, they may have actually cooked their own goose, because this war has shown up the fact that fossil fuels are not the cheap, reliable, safe solution that they've always said they were. Just the opposite. And all over the planet, people are massively turning to renewables instead. The climate is at a tipping point, and this threatens to dwarf all the rest of what we're facing. So in what we're fighting for, we have to get real fast. We have to face hard questions about what we're doing and what effect it's having, because there are so many cons. Does that heat pump or heat network actually work? Or is it so badly designed and installed and maintained that it actually costs more to run than a gas boiler? Does that home retrofit really leave you warm and healthy? Or does it make your home damp and even colder than before? Is your campaign marching you up to the top of the hill just to march you down again? What is the practical result of our campaigns? We don't have much time left, and the demands you choose matter. So I wanted to talk about FPA's demands and how they fit this moment. We've just started a campaign called Make Green Fair. Make Green Fair is needed because, sadly, a lot of the renewable energy industry that we're turning to now, a lot of it's been created in the image of the fossil fuel industry. That is complete with lethal, exploitative mining in the global south, inefficient kit and bad controls, and unfair pricing everywhere, with a whole system designed for profit. And it especially sucks money from the people who have least to begin with. Come to our conference in September if you want to hear more about this. There's a poverty premium on energy, green energy too. Take the price of nighttime power. Electricity is cheaper at night for people with storage heaters. Good. But why is a pensioner in a bedsit with a storage heater charged twice as much at night as her richer neighbours who are charging their electric car? Why don't people in council housing get the benefit of solar panels on their roofs? Why do people in housing estates with heat networks end up forced into a system that breaks down all the time and costs them double just because it's deemed to be green? It doesn't have to do that, but it very often does. A lot of people are used to, quote, green stuff not working or not being fair to them. These issues are blown out of all proportion by Reform and Co., who, of course, claim that fossil fuels are better. Of course they do. That's who funds them. But the trouble is that there's some truth in what they say about unfairness. And the answer is not to pretend that it's all okay so we don't frighten the horses. We've had the same argument with retrofit. Some campaigners didn't want to admit that cowboy retrofit firms were destroying people's homes instead of fixing them. But you have to name it to fix it. And we're making some progress with that. If something is compounding inequality, it's not part of the solution. In fact, it's part of building reform. The answer is not to cover it up, but to make it fair. If we do that, we'll be well on the way to energy for all. You probably know about energy for all. It's where everyone gets what they need for the basics: heating, lighting, cooking, charging disability aids. Energy for all will be paid for in part by higher prices for luxury use, and in part, it'll be paid from the government money that's now going to subsidize the fossil fuel industry's profits. And now it will also use energy that's free when there's a surplus of wind and solar farm power on a windy or a sunny day. So that's our vision: energy security at home. It's also something that political parties are looking at seriously. They're not exactly going for E for A, for any for G for all, but they're looking at something called the Essential Energy Guarantee. With the war in Iran, they know that we could end up with a genuine, serious shortage of energy, and it's just not going to be accepted that the rich will get all of it because they're the ones who can pay for it. It's not going to be accepted that everyone else will have none. So they're looking at something else. The Essential Energy Guarantee is different from Energy for All. It's not based on need, like E4A is. There's no higher cost for people who use loads of energy on their private swimming pools. That's a problem. It won't reduce carbon emissions by disincentivizing waste and gluttony. It's less climate friendly than E4A, but it's a step towards Energy for All, and at least it's universal. It's not means tested, it's universal like the NHS. No means test is a principle that people fought for in the last century, but it's been seen as outlandish and impossible for decades now. But now, everything's unprecedented. These two twin demands, energy for all and make green fair, didn't come out of this oil war, but they might as well have. They're made for it. Meeting basic needs, moving away from oil, focused on justice and results. And together, they can contribute to what George Monbiot calls a social tipping point, where quite suddenly people shift their perspective and insist on outrageous things like votes for women, or independence for India, or abortion in Ireland, things that are impossible until all of a sudden they're inevitable. That social tipping point based on justice is what we're trying to build.
There we go. Words from Ruth London, our one of the directors of Fuel Poverty Action. Surely one of the most recognizable ones. I will drop that a link in the chat in just a moment, linking to our new campaign, Make Green Fair. But following on from Ruth, we have Kimya, who's here from Energy Embargo for Palestine, which is an anti-imperialist organization based in Britain that's responding to the call from Palestinian trade unions to disrupt energy flow to Israel. And Kimya's here to give us a little bit more context about the ongoing war in Iran and why that's important for us.
Hi everyone. It's really good to be with you all here today. And yeah, also thank you, Ruth. Oh, I don't think Ruth's on the call, but I thought that was a great intro. So yeah, I'm going to speak to the significance of the Strait of Hormuz in the global economy and the war and I guess like the consequences of its closure and whether this fallout will advance an energy transition away from oil and gas. So, following from Following Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz, as a response to US-Israel imposed war, we are witnessing what analysts have described as the largest energy crisis in history. And global oil prices, as we are all witnessing, have surged, and the repercussions are being felt across the world economy from lowering global harvest yields to increasing fuel poverty in Britain. And to understand the significance of the Strait of Hormuz, we must situate it within the broader imperialist strategy of the US and Israel. The strait is the world's most critical energy choke point, and a substantial portion of the world's seaborne oil actually passes through it, making it essential for global transit. But its significance extends beyond commerce, and the ease of access it provides is essential for the US, which is precisely why the Gulf has become a focal point for the US's long hybrid war against the region. And to understand this a bit more, if we go back to, 1974, in the aftermath of the war in Vietnam and the 1973 Arab oil embargo, the United States and Saudi Arabia struck a deal where Saudi would sell its oil exclusively in US dollars, and in exchange, the US would arm and protect the monarchy. And this actually marked the beginning of the petrodollar system, the locking of oil into the dollar and the formal intertwining of imperialist militarism with Gulf stability. And you see this with, Saudi, kind of, or like the US claiming that they offer security to the Gulf states by expanding its kind of military bases in the region. And whilst like intertwining that with the development of it and expansion of the petrodollar kind of model. So the closure of the strait is hence challenging US integration with the Gulf and the petrodollar system that establishes US hegemony. And as we see, current threats from Trump to occupy the south of Iran and the Strait, we see that the Strait is actually an active site in contesting Iran's natural ability to leverage its geography. And the closure of the Strait of Hormuz actually accelerated the drive for new east to west energy corridors. On the 19th of March, just a couple of months ago, soon after Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, Netanyahu called for reshaping the region, where he, quote, said that we need oil pipelines, gas pipelines going west through the Arabian Peninsula, right up to Israel, right up to our Mediterranean ports, and you've just done away with the choke points forever. So by routing Gulf oil westwards to Israel's Mediterranean ports, the strait would be bypassed completely, and that actually elevates Israel's strategic importance as a global energy hub. And we've written about this more in long read analysis that I can share in the chat. So Netanyahu's vision, it reflects a long-standing US-Israeli strategy to reshape West Asia through, a mixture of hybrid warfare, normalization deals, and creating asymmetrical energy dependencies. And if you look towards, like the recent Abraham Accords, which was like a normalization agreement with several of the kind of Gulf and Arab states, this was an attempt to, further subordinate Arab states to Israeli energy exports, whilst cultivating a comprador class which is invested in sustaining the Israeli project. So we've also seen that the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has accelerated what we call the Turkish corridor. And this is, like a competing corridor with the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, where, like Israel actually receives at least 40% of its total crude oil imports from this Turkey corridor. And I guess like the point that I'm making with all of this, all of these different, corridors that the war on Iran are kind of accelerating to find, new ways to transport oil and gas is that like the fallout from this transition is actually just advancing new infrastructure to facilitate the flow of oil to the West, against arguments that might suggest otherwise. And the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has actually generated, immediate material consequences. And the most visible effect is the sharp increase in global energy prices. In Britain, household energy bills are projected to rise by 13%, an increase which has been directly attributed to the closure. And before the US Zionist war on Iran, over 2 million British households were already in fuel poverty. And with the latest hike, that figure will of course rise exponentially. So energy prices have, often remained relatively low for the global north due to the extraction of resources from the global south at exploitatively low rates. But despite this, the British working class are now experiencing a colonial boomerang effect, as privatized energy monopolies are now treating households as revenue streams. And we've seen that, decades of privatization has concentrated energy supply in the hands of a few dominant firms like Shell, British Gas, the National Grid, whose profits are shielded by a regulator that prioritizes shareholder returns over consumer protections. And low wages and frozen welfare benefits, this compounds the problem, leaving millions unable to cover basic costs. So we know that this isn't an accident, it's a systemic feature of capitalist imperialism. And whilst, the world's largest oil and gas companies are projected to pocket over $230 billion dollars in profits this year, we know that like families across Britain, and more families will struggle to heat their homes. So, to reflect on our final question, will the fallout advance a global energy transition away from oil and gas? In Energy Embargo for Palestine, we suggest that, like inherently, like this fallout won't. In fact, the crisis is actually being used to deepen existing fossil fuel infrastructure, and as I said, the proposed pipelines going west is the new infrastructure of the same oil and gas. It's a redrawing of routes to secure US imperial hegemony, and it's not a shift away from extraction. And we also argue that, a transition to renewable energy under the current imperialist order is not a solution in and of itself. If we look towards, Israel's plan to produce one third of its energy from renewables by 2030 relies on developing infrastructure in the occupied West Bank, the Jawlan, and the Nakab. And it's, part of the same settler colonial project, it's part of the same kind of expansionist project in the region of, like occupying and colonizing Arab land. And we see that, a greener energy system under imperialist control, it's merely just a new face on extraction. It's still fueled by the exploitation of West Asia and the global south. So the Strait of Hormuz crisis, it will not by itself drive a transition away from oil and gas, but it does, however, expose the contradictions of a global energy system organized around US-led imperialism and militarism. And these are contradictions that we can actually deepen to organize for a truly like anti-imperialist revolutionary transition that encompasses like a real radical energy transition. And this requires a political project that connects struggles against fuel poverty, the housing crisis, ecological collapse into a united front against imperialism. It requires a fight for an energy and arms embargo on Israel, like realizing, the relationship between what an energy embargo on Israel could look like to the expropriation of, these corporate energy monopolies that are driving fuel poverty in Britain. And it's all linked to like this real commitment to actually building power from below. So to end fuel poverty, to end genocide, and to build a just energy system, we have to end imperialism. And I'd be excited to talk more, in the discussion section on what our organizing could look like to advance this. But yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for that, Kimia. Some unexpected takes. Uh, Much appreciated. Were much appreciated for sure. Um, um, yeah, and next up we've got Robert Palmer to talk a little bit more, continue the conversation about the UK transitioning away from fossil fuels. Robert is the Deputy Director at Uplift, where he provides strategic leadership, builds key external partnerships. Thanks for being here, Robert, and is a spokesperson for the organization. He's a seasoned economic and climate justice campaigner and media commentator, and was previously the executive director of Tax Justice UK, um, and led a multi-award-winning team at Global Win.
Yeah, listening to that, thank you everyone. Listening to that, I'm like, oh, that sounds a little bit corporate, doesn't it? Anyway, that's the bio on our website. Yeah, as Amal said previously, I campaigned for taxing wealth more and a wealth tax in the UK, and also went after the financial sector for facilitating corruption around the world. So that's a kind of like maybe a different framing of my how I got here. Uplift, we are an organization that works to ensure a rapid and fair transition away from oil and gas production in the UK. And something that I really want to pick up on from the previous two interventions, which are really inspiring, is that we can't just say green is good. In fact, we need social and economic justice really to be at the heart of the transition, both because it is absolutely the morally right thing to do, but it is also, from a practical way, the only way in which we can transition successfully and bring people along with us. And I think, at the moment, the UK's reliance on oil and gas makes all of us poorer through higher energy bills and climate breakdown, except the oil and gas companies, their bosses, their shareholders, their outriders, the voices in the media, the politicians who are in their pockets. And, we can see this with the current war. We've had a price spike in energy, but this is the second energy crisis caused by war in just 5 years. We had the war in Ukraine, which has obviously a devastating humanitarian impact in the region, but also led to absolutely huge spikes in oil and gas prices. And the context of that is we're already in the UK, we have millions of people in fuel poverty, and these energy spikes caused by our reliance on fossil fuels and caused by war has made that fuel poverty crisis even worse. Um, there was some analysis from the End Fuel Poverty Coalition, which shows that the energy giants, the companies in the UK, have made 125 billion pounds in profits since the energy crisis kicked off with the war in Ukraine. So this is vast amounts of money. This week, Centrica, who owns British Gas, announced £500 million in profits today. They're paying dividends, but they're also cutting 1,000 jobs. Centrica has made £55 billion in profits since it was privatized, since British Gas was privatized 40 years ago. Uh, One more, Equinor, which is the Norwegian state oil company and one of the companies that wants to drill more in the North Sea, has just announced profits of £8.5 billion. That's just for 3 months. And that's double the same profits that they made last year. So these are companies that are profiting from war and that are profiting from climate breakdown. Um, and our energy bills are driven by the high cost of fossil fuels. And perhaps when you think about your gas bill, the link is more obvious because the energy companies have to buy the gas from somewhere, and that's driven by the international market. But also, our electricity bills are also driven by fossil fuels because at the moment, the price of electricity is set by what is the most expensive form of electricity to come online last, and that is almost always gas. And so, both with gas and electricity, our reliance on fossil fuels are continuing to drive high prices. Um, from some people, you hear a solution which is to do what Donald Trump wants to do, which is drill, baby, drill. And we've had some really big debates, certainly in the UK and elsewhere, that, we've got all this oil and gas, let's just pump it out and use it. Um, but the evidence is really clear. More North Sea oil drilling will do nothing to bring down our bills. And that's because most of what's left is oil, which is sold on the international market at international prices. And even the industry admits this. More drilling will also do basically nothing to improve our energy security. We have to import huge amounts of gas and oil at the moment anyway. And so, I've talked quite a lot about the economics of the oil and gas industry and the kind of pretty devastating impact it's had in terms of poverty compared to the profiteering of the industry. But we can obviously also see the consequences of the drilling and burning of oil and gas all around us in terms of climate breakdown. Here in the UK, we're going through our third heat wave, record-breaking heat wave of the summer. And really tragically, there's an estimate that the heat waves have caused 2,700 excess deaths here just in the UK. But linking back to what Kimia says, like the UK is not at the forefront of the climate crisis. There are countries around the world that are suffering significantly more than we are in the UK in terms of droughts, floods, fires. And, just the sort of daily tragedies of people dying because they're forced to work in conditions that are too hot. Um, the fossil fuel industry, as you can probably imagine, is one of the most powerful lobby groups in the world. The industry has known about the impact of climate change since at least the 1980s. That's documented. And the industry spends vast sums lobbying governments around the world and further entrenching its power. As has been touched on, we do know the solution. We need to rapidly and fairly, with justice, move away from our dependency on fossil fuels to renewables and support households to move away from electricity. Move towards electricity and electrification. But sometimes this gets talked about as heat pumps and electric vehicles and Teslas. Um, but as you can perhaps suggest, those are renewable and green energy solutions for the wealthy. We also need to think about, and I'm particularly talking about here in the UK, which is my expertise, but more globally, better public transport, good quality climate adapted social housing. I think we also need to think about who owns green energy. And one of the things that we're campaigning for is more community and public ownership of renewable energy. But it's also about jobs. There are a lot of workers who currently work in industries that are reliant on the fossil fuel industry. And we will, both again from a moral point of view and also a strategic point of view, we will not be able to move into a fair, just, approach to energy if we are not also supporting workers that into good, new quality, unionized, high-paying jobs. We have a new government, as everyone probably knows, and there are some big decisions coming down the line. One of the big decisions it's going to make on oil and gas is a massive oil field called Rosebank, which is the largest untapped oil field in the North Sea. Um, Drilling Rosebank would emit 70% of the UK's annual carbon emissions. So just on like a carbon climate point of view alone, it shouldn't go ahead. But Rosebank could also send hundreds of millions of pounds towards Israel's Delek group. And Delek has been flagged by the UN for human rights abuses in the occupied Palestinian territories due to its operations in illegal West Bank settlements. And it is also known, Delek is also known to provide fuel to the Israeli military via its via subsidiary. So what we are trying to do at Uplift and with our partners through the Stop Rosebank campaign is really demonstrate the blowback if Rosebank is approved. And there's a campaign that we've got that I'll share in the thread. But just like pulling this together, I think it's really clear that we need to get off our dependency of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are driving war, they're driving climate breakdown, they're driving inequality, they're driving imperialism. But if we do the move away from fossil fuels by just replicating the same power and economic dynamics that currently underpin the current system, we're not going to be changing much. And so I think we will only succeed if we really put justice at the heart of what we're trying to do. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert, for that mention. And again, and yeah, building on loads of Kimi's points there. Um, Last but not least, we're going to hear from Kirsten, Kirsten Bays, who is the local outreach coordinator for the Campaign Against Arms Trade. Kirsten's also chair of the Nuclear Information Service and of Reading Pride. Kirsten, great to have you with us.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be with you. I'm probably going to split my talk into three separate sections. I also promised I'd stay within the 7 minutes, so just let me start the timer. There we go. I'm going to do like 2 or 3 minutes on weapons and war. I mean, it's a small subject, so it won't take very long. I'm going to do a couple of minutes on what we call the carbon blueprint. So, in other words, the impact on military activities on climate change. And then I'm going to talk for maybe 2 or 3 minutes about the legal repression that campaigners are experiencing in trying to stop some of this stuff. So let me begin. So first thing to say, obviously, I come from Campaign Against the Arms Trade. The arms trade is big business, and most people don't get a sense of how big that business is. So let me give you an idea of it. It's dominated by, shall we say, the top 100 arms companies, private entities typically, sometimes state-owned. that essentially supply governments with weapons. And globally, it's a $650 billion a year business. A lot of that business is connected with aerospace. So we're talking jet fighters, we're talking transport planes, helicopters. Large chunks of it are associated with missiles, rockets, drones. But then you have warships and you have kind of land forces as well, so tanks, those sorts of pieces of equipment. So $650 billion, of which stick a finger in the air and depending how you draw the boundaries around it and so lots of caveats, of which $40 billion, something like 25 to 30 billion pounds, is basically British made weaponry, of which roughly two-thirds is paid for by UK taxpayers in terms of sales to the Ministry of Defence, and about a third is paid for by foreign taxpayers, so arms exports. Used to be most of our arms exports went to the Middle East, and we'll talk about why that is in a moment. Right now, arms exports to Europe are creeping up, but I think it's really interesting. We've had a lot of kind of stories being told about how Europe needs to militarize and it's time to be a militarized place and let's militarize, let's buy lots of weapons. And yet, even after all that, um, the kind of weaponry on sale to Europe is rising just to the Middle East levels, which goes to show about just how militarized the Middle East was and has always been. And the question we should be asking is why is that? And I think the quick answer is that the arms industry is part of a system, and you can simply call it weapons for oil, but more in a more complex way, you could call it weapons for cash, for oil, for cash, for weapons. A cycle of weapons being used to control physical resources like oil fields, gas fields, coal fields, I guess, also mining resources. Those resources being used to generate cash that's then used to purchase more weapons. And, we've heard a lot about places like Saudi Arabia. The Al Yamaya deal was that explicitly. It really was selling weapons to the Saudis in return for their oil, and the proceeds of Saudi oil sales went on to account in the Ministry of Defence that was then used to buy weapons for them. It was that transparent. The consequences of this have been some of the conflicts that we've seen. And the ones we've talked about, Ukraine, Iran, have clear oil industry links. Not very much has been made about this Sabotin field around Crimea, but it's the center of the Ukraine conflict. And again, people may have forgotten, but I'm going to say September 2022, the explosion around the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the attacks on energy facilities going on from Ukraine into Russia. It's an oil war. It is now and has always been an oil war. The Iranian situation, the Straits of Hormuz, and obviously Iranian attacks on oil production in the Gulf and vice versa. Again, it's hard to characterize it as anything other than oil-connected wars. And you have oil-connected wars when you have oil and when you have weapons and when there's cash involved. So that's what's going on there. So that was 2.5 minutes. That's not bad. Um, so let's talk about the carbon impact of all this stuff. If you listen to the if you listen to the militaries of this world, and by the way, I don't recommend you do because you're wasting your time. They would tell you they're doing everything. They want to be NATO wants to be carbon zero in its military activities by 2050. If they're the world in 2050, that would be great. But yeah, they want to be carbon zero. So you might ask, well, how are they doing? And the answer is none of them are hitting their targets. Very few of them actually have targets. Those that have done um, have revealed the essential truth. And this kind of data comes from our lovely friends at Scientists for Global Responsibility, who after the talk I'll drop the chat. I'll drop a link into the chat because it's a great resource. Just had a new report come out. Essentially, they were saying that the only way that militaries have actually hit their carbon targets has been to scale back their activities. So Germany has effectively what's gone on is the military has banked the decarbonisation of um, domestic power supplies. So the reason the Ministry of Defense is suddenly much more carbon neutral is because the power grid is more carbon neutral. Strip that out, they're just as bad as they've always been. And the reason is pretty clear. It's because military activities are massively carbon demanding. You know, taking a Chinook helicopter takes 10 times as much uh, fuel as taking the bus. Driving a Humvee takes 10 times as much fuel as driving an ordinary car. It is really that straightforward. So the more military activity you have, the more green, the more carbon, the more greenhouse gas emissions you have as part of that. So I think I'm coming to the end of my 7 minutes. I'm going to talk very briefly about legal repression. Uh, and I think the question we need to ask is who set up the system and who agreed to it? And the answer is none of us did. None of us were consulted about the defense investment plan that's just come out, where we're talking about funneling 60 billion quid into the nuclear industry, specifically the nuclear weapons industry. And I'm just going to say the reason they're doing it is because they've massively overspent on the Trident replacement program, and you can ask me about that. And I think that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is, where I was up at Elbit at Filton earlier today at the demonstration there, and 25 young people are kind of facing long prison sentences for attempting to stop arms exports from that factory, which we know for sure have been used in the killing of Palestinians, the perpetuation of genocide. And instead of being lauded for their civic virtue, for doing the things that we should all be doing to stop the commission of mass war crimes, they are facing uh, essentially accusations of being terrorists. And so for me, I think what we have to say is we have a structure that's founded on the military exploitation of oil that is doing nothing to stop its own greenhouse emissions, let alone helping anybody else's, and which criminalizes those who oppose it and is ruthless and persistent. So that's kind of what I have in 7 minutes, a little bit over 7 minutes, but hopefully that gives people a start.
That's great. Thank you very much, Kirsten. Much appreciated, especially the sort of comparisons between taking a bus or driving a Humvee. Very relatable. We're now going to move it into the second part of the session. We can call it where I hand over to everyone else that's here. Um, or let's say we can just all have a chat together. But yeah, feel free to come in with your comments, your questions, any clarifications, or just, if you just have anything to say. Now is the time. Please just raise your virtual hand to do this. You can find it it's now under the like React button. You can put a hand up. And I see we already have a hand up. Before I bring you in, Les, I just want to say as well, yeah, our speakers, Robert, Kimia, Kirsten. Again, if you have more things to say or things you would have liked to add in, yeah, feel free to just slot them in whenever you come in. But yeah,
Okay,
Les,
thanks.
hiya, how you doing?
Uh, Good. Yeah, I'd like to thank the organizers for linking all these issues in the same webinar, which is ambitious but necessary, and it should be done more often. That means perhaps more time for the speakers to analyze the links between fuel poverty, climate, and militarization. But here we go. It's a good start. I mean, Kirsten alluded to the criminalization of Palestine activists. And of course, in parallel, there's been a criminalization of climate activists. So we need a way to understand where this threat comes from. And we might understand it partly as psychological warfare of many kinds. As regards to militarization, in the last few years, especially since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that has been almost welcomed as an opportunity by all the NATO warmongers as a pretext to justify why they should not only continue NATO, but expand it potentially anywhere and to get ready for all sorts of threats by building up defenses against this imaginary Russian invasion of Western Europe. And that in turn, as the previous speaker indicated, the enormous expansion of the budget can then retrospectively cover up all sorts of failures in military expenditure. But it all depends on frightening us into submission and frightening us into silence. That if we speak out against this, somehow we are surrendering to foreign enemies. But it should be clear that the main enemy is here. Right? It's the British state militarizing the economy and trying to frighten us into passivity, as regards the arms budget and likewise on climate. Although the government may want to decarbonize, it wants to control that process. And it doesn't want activists pressurizing the state or industry to decarbonize anything until there's an elite decision that it shall be done that way. So, and the term terrorist, which was formalized in the Terrorism Act 2000, is now being increasingly used along with all sorts of public order legislation, worded in a suitably vague way to justify prosecuting almost any activity, right, as threatening public order and so on. So I suppose I'm posing a question: how do we in the broad sense, all these campaigns, develop a coherent perspective to counter this threat, including the psychological warfare?
Thank you very much, Les. Would someone want to come in on that? Kirsten, yeah.
We got some energy to answer it. I think the first thing to say is all is not lost. There are plenty of people who are going through the courts who are being properly defended, who are being acquitted, where juries are, hearing the case, reflecting thoughtfully. There's really good parts of that system. And continuing to make that happen, I think is important. I think what's also true though, and where we've seen the mass arrests of, for example, the Defend Our Juries, um, uh, folks who were obviously arrested for carrying signs, saying they support Palestine Action or whoever. I think there we start to see the ridiculousness of the system, and I think for me, if we have to do one thing, it is to continue to talk about it, to continue to explain it, continue to be in solidarity with the people involved. One of the real things about the whole silencing, the whole terrorist thing is it's an attempt to silence. It's an attempt to make people shut up. And if I can tell a personal anecdote, before I did a lot of arms trade stuff, I used to do a lot of animal rights stuff, and I was dragged away by the police for a particular animal rights piece of action, and the police issued a statement which was talking about how animal rights terrorists, by which they referring to me and my co-defendant because we were the only ones that they had in their custody at that particular point, should face the full force of the law. Um, Essentially branding people who were taking action for animals as terrorists. And I always remember that Bill Oddie, the comedian, stood up and said they're not animal rights terrorists. They are ordinary people concerned about our wildlife. And we need to continue to kind of model that behavior. These are not terrorists. They are your neighbors, your friends, the people that you know, and they're taking action to prevent grave crimes and terrible things going on. And whatever names they're called, they're doing some righteous stuff. That's what I have.
Thanks very much, Kirsten. Kimia?
Yeah, I really agree with Kirsten. And yeah, thank you, Les, also for your contribution. I think like we also need to challenge this framing of terrorism because we've seen that, like terror designations have been used against national liberation struggles across the world, and we're seeing, in the US right now, and like this is going to be um like imported in Britain, and like we're seeing all paths with the criminalization of the Palestine movement and the climate movement kind of moving towards this. But if we see in the US like the recent kind of like or like the attempt to kind of legislate repression against the left, and like linking like left organizations in the US to like terrorist organizations, like this terror designation is going to be used against all of us, like in the left, even those who have been maybe like more on the liberal left, or like maybe more like unequivocal in Palestine. But this is clearly going to be used against us all. And I think this is exactly why I think it actually shows to some extent that our movement is actually working, because it's requiring like a deeper response from the state, because they're really threatened by like the sustained kind of direct action over the past 2.5 years against Britain's role in the genocide. And like the sustained action we've been seeing, especially from young people who are genuinely worried about, like the state of our future, and like where we're like heading towards. So I think like the answer really comes down to, building the infrastructure in like across the left for like sustained direct action, and to not isolate people that are right now being designated as terrorists. Like I think that isolation would be like it would mean would actually accelerate, like the designation of all of us as terrorists. And yeah, I think really we need to kind of be building like quite a broad and like mass coalition to make sure that, like our basic right to protest is not taken away from us. And we are seeing these like coalitions that are being made. Um, so yeah.
Thanks very much, Kimia. Much appreciated. Stephen?
Thanks. Sorry, I'm late. I mean, whether we use the word terror or we use a word like horror, I mean, in so many languages, they mean the same thing: horror and terror. Um, if I had to substantiate as a thing, um, what terror or horror is, I would say oil, oil, because it destroys the planet. It's ruining everybody's future, and yet it's considered okay by most people. There are cars everywhere around us. Most of them run on oil. Um, all vehicles run on oil. The ships run on fossil fuels, on oil, and so on and so on. Um, so that's substantiating the terror, the horror as a thing, oil. So it's the protectors of oil who we have to really be concerned about. And we have to understand that oil, in the mind of Donald Trump and his loony mates, and the reality is we all know Donald Trump is a loony, and yet he's the president of America. Isn't that strange? Extremely strange. So while the global economy will not let go of oil, anybody who challenges it will be, well, terrorized by the likes of Trump and his supporters. And, it's a crazy world. We can go on and on, but that's enough for the moment.
Cheers, Steve. Robert?
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I agree in terms of like as like oil as being as terror, and just in kind of like the damage it has done to our planet, the damage it's done to our politics in terms of the fossil fuel industry's ability to buy politics, the damage it is doing financially, the damage it is doing from a kind of justice point of view. Um, it's really shocking. I mean, if I was trying to provide some optimism, I would say that our move away from fossil fuels is increasing as the world. So, my understanding is last year renewables overtook coal as the world's largest source of electricity generation. So like that is good news. But as Ian Kimira has pointed out, that like actually a lot of that is driven by the same sort of capitalism and kind of geopolitics that has underlied the horror of the dominance of oil. And so while yes, the world is moving away slowly from the reliance, particularly when it comes to electricity generation from fossil fuels, we are not doing that in a way that is fair or just. And we're not doing it fast enough in order to uh, reduce the risks of like catastrophic climate breakdown. So um, I suppose I just wanted to say that because I think there are some things to feel there are some things that are positives, even if the framework in which they're happening is still deeply problematic and that we need to campaign and fight against.
Thanks very much. And just to throw my 2 cents in it, I mean, I think um, putting this session together at a time at which, there was this huge discussion, public discussion. Well, at least it was a lot in the news. It wasn't so much public. It's more people talking to the public about how much we need, this defense budget increase. I think obviously the US also increased the defense budget to a new record. They've surpassed the like $1 trillion defense budget. Um, and having this conversation today and just thinking about how much we know, how much we've planned for transitioning away from fossil fuels. And we're having this chat today saying how much how intrinsic and how tied the military industry is to to perpetuating the fossil fuel system, and it doesn't seem to mirror. We don't seem to have managed to be as loud about, or to have as much collective knowledge, or for that knowledge to be um sufficiently available really for how we or even to imagine a world without weapons, without militaries. Um and yeah, so perhaps just talking about that a little bit, how can we move away from that? How can we move away from this militarized world that is self-perpetuating? Any thoughts on that? Yeah, Kirsten.
You know, when I was younger, I always used to think that if people only knew, then things would change. If people only knew what was happening in Indonesia, East Timor, then you know what? They would rise up and get in the way. Um, I think it's hard for those of us who have been campaigning on things like Yemen, um, which took place before the sort of the current Gaza genocide. As you as you talk about Yemen and sort of tens of thousands of people being killed, and you can show videos of it, and you can talk about how the system did it, and then uh, and then you see it repeated in Gaza, and then you start to see it repeated again in Sudan, and Yemen comes back into the picture again because they're attacking it again. Um, this stuff is out there. People can watch it. People can see it. They can find out. They know it's happening. Um, it's no longer the case that people don't know what's going on. Um, so I think it's not just a question of getting the word out, and if we just let people know, raise awareness, then a thing will happen. I think where I'm getting to is we need to organize, and I think we need to organize securely. I think we need to start to create models for organization that exclude the forces of the state. I'm thinking about organization that excludes the police, and make sure that you don't have undercover corporate spies in the middle of it, that make sure that you can deliver a lot of the kind of goals that we're trying to achieve. And that actually that kind of system or structured organizing is how we do. Now, what that does demand is it demands time, it demands money, it demands energy from people who often don't have very much to spare. And for those of us who work in paid roles in various movements, that has to be a kind of the thought that we have to have is to find ways to organize using the technologies at our disposal in a way that creates the mass that we're looking for, that actually takes that awareness and turns it into action, and which blunts the state's response in terms of its legalistic, its spying, and its misbehavior. Really going after that as part of the organization, as well as the kind of goals that we're looking for. That's kind of what I have. I don't think I wish I could wave a magic wand and just say, and you know what, it's happening right now. But that kind of combination is starting to take shape for sure.
Steve, and then Kimia. Stevie there.
Yeah, sorry. In terms of human behavior, what we have to do is, and it'll sound pathetic in a way, is love. Just give out love, not hate, not anger. Okay, we can be angry about all these things, and we are. There is. It's very human to be angry about the things we're discussing, but in terms of expressing an expression of emotion, what we have to do is love, 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 and love and love. It's like loving the whole world to death, but but it's not even to. It's beyond death. It's loving the whole world into eternity, actually beyond death. And what do I mean by that? All these things we're describing, all these types of behaviors or types of people who are causing trouble to the world, what are they? They're all, I would say, or ideological fundamentalists and religious fundamentalists. And so it's like, you've got to, I'm right and you're wrong. And there's a great big schism between me and you. And when you look at other people and you see a schism, you imagine they're totally different to you. What that does, the next step is it leads you into a mental framework of hating other people. So you hate gay people, you hate trans people, you hate little people, you hate overweight people or people who are too slim, ages and everything you can imagine. You hate poor people. It's all sorts of schisms, all sorts of divisions that replicate themselves. But when you love, even with Donald Trump, you know, the best thing to do to Donald Trump is not wring his neck because that doesn't solve anything. It's actually, you need to just get through. It's about getting through to everyone. And love actually does not destroy. It doesn't have the capability of destroying. It destroys what is bad, but not in a violent way. So Kirsten was talking about the methodology. I'm talking about the human behavioral aspect to it.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay.
Much appreciated. Kimia, and then Kirsten.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I agree with Kirsten for sure that like people know like what's happening, and I think like we are witnessing, like a live stream genocide. Like there's like everyone is kind of aware on what's happening. But I think like the problem is that a lot of people don't necessarily know how things are connected or what it means to like to their day-to-day life. And I think like this is exactly the case that we need to be making on what the relationship between anti-imperialist struggle is with socialist struggle in Britain. And I think like if we like speak about and I didn't get to speak too much about this, but you know, like the question of sovereignty, um, and its relationship to imperialism, I find it's a very like important thing to talk about because you know, like we've mentioned, you know, the genocide in Gaza, like the genocide in Sudan, the war on Iran and the recent attacks on Yemen. But this is all, you know, kind of connected in the US like world imperialist system and Britain's role in it, which refuses the sovereignty of nations in the global south where we have been, you know, or like the global north have kind of been taking resources from for like centuries now. And you know, like this constant like violation of sovereignty is actually such a big driver to the climate crisis and the current like conditions that we're witnessing. Like if we look to a couple of months ago when the US first struck Iran's oil like industry in Tehran, like the city was like in black smoke afterwards. Like people were waking up with like petrochemical smoke kind of like engulfing the city. And that's not a reality that like we in Britain are yet to have to live, but this is exactly like what the reality is of when US and like and Britain and its role like in this kind of like NATO alliance, like what it does to like global South nations, like it accelerates the impact of the climate crisis through this denial of sovereignty. So I think like the point that I'm making is that the support for national sovereignty of the global south, which is intrinsic to anti-imperialist struggle, and it's something that we've been doing in the Palestine movement for, you know, the past 3 years. Like we've been making the case for, you know, the sovereignty of Palestine, the sovereignty of Yemen, like Arab sovereignty, like in the region. Um, this kind of like anti-imperialist struggle has to be connected with how we articulate socialism in Britain because like currently like we know that like even if this war didn't happen like the energy system like it's not catered towards the British working class, it's not catered towards like people in the country, and it's you know like it's the same ruling class that fuels imperialism that also fuels you know fuel poverty in this country. So I think like we have to kind of constantly link these things together. And the way that we link it is actually by articulating, like as I said, that like this kind of shared political project. Because I think it's not just about like achieving like you know like reforms like under like a Labour Party that will still be committed to rearmament or and like as Kirsten has said like this rearmament is like a big driver of the climate crisis as well. So yeah, I think like I think our organizations like we need to be like thinking more critically around like okay like what is the relationship between anti-imperialism and like what is our organization's role in socialist struggle in Britain, and like how can we be like uniting these things together. And I think like resisting rearmament is like a very like tangible way of doing this. And like we actually published a brief with Climate Vanguard, which I can share, that, you know, is a brief for left organizations on what our role should be in resisting rearmament. But like I think, yeah, like we also need to be supporting especially like voluntary organizations like We're All Volunteers and Energy Embargo for Palestine, people that are willing to make personal sacrifices to advance the struggle for socialism and anti-imperialism.
Lucky me. Kirsten?
Amazing. Yeah, no, I'm very very supportive of what Camille was just saying. I've got a friend she's an energy protester. She's an anti-militarist, and so Jed, and she talks about the giant cabbage of wrong, and that we're all caterpillars slowly nibbling away. We may not always see the connections between the different issues, between fuel and militarism and exploitation and you know the cost of living, that sort of thing. Um, but we do know things are wrong, and we do take action against it at all kinds of different levels. So I think I definitely like to see ourselves as those caterpillars nibbling on the giant cabbage of wrong. And she always says that the greatest moment as a caterpillar in that cabbage is meeting another caterpillar but coming from a different direction. She says that's when your little tunnels through the cabbage link up, and that those are the great moments when you then start to eat the cabbage together. Um, so the question is how to do it. And I think there's two things I think that we can do as campaigners that I think the people, our opponents, 'cause I'm not going to call them our enemies because that's their view. They're our opponents. They're people who are opposed to us. There are two things that we do that they can't do that are powerful and that drive the movements forward. Because arms dealers love their children, they love their families. Many of them, I'm sure, love their countries. What they don't do is demonstrate solidarity with others. They are not in solidarity with working class people. They're not in solidarity with the global south. They're not in solidarity with the people who are under their weapons. So they love, of course they do, but they're not in. They don't act in solidarity. We do. We don't always act in the way that we should. We're not always able to be there for everybody, but we do. So when Al Haq were going through the courts trying to stop arms exports to Israel, there were a whole bunch of organizations who were supporting them, who were trying to kind of who were there providing briefs, right? And that was really hopeful. But what was also really interesting is when Donald Trump actually turned off Al Haq's bank accounts, it was amazing how quickly many of those organizations dropped away and how dispiriting that was. But he did it precisely because he was trying to break that solidarity. And so we as organizations have to, A, invest in solidarity actions, keep moving it forward, but B, also understand that the state is terrified of it. And rightly so. It should be terrified of the solidarity of the working class here with international movements and the global south. That's how change is done. That's where it comes from. That's what's going to happen. So yeah, they're going to do everything they can to break these movements up. They'll tell you that trans people are terrible. They'll tell you that disabled people are sponges. They'll tell you all kinds of stuff. Well, they're lying, which brings us to the second thing that we can do that they don't. Their empire is founded on lies. It's structured, systematic, well-funded lying. We watch the Donald Trumps of this world on the TV, and it's kind of obvious. At least it should be obvious that he essentially is a stream of lies. But he's the embodiment of a system that actually is founded on lies, that's founded on untruth. The idea that people in other countries are massively different to us and that their needs are less important is a lie. It's a simple lie. The idea that people fleeing repression, are coming here to do whatever it is that the state says that it fears from refugees, pure lies, absolute untruth. And so we can be truth tellers. We can say words. But what I would say is where we tell truths that challenge the established discord, they can seem both radical and wild and terrible. I can tell you for absolute sure that the Trident Replacement Project is without a doubt the biggest public program that this country has ever undertaken in the last century. That is demonstrably true. Yeah, it sounds like a really wild thing. And you're saying bigger than HS2? By orders of magnitude. Uh, so, so that's the point I'm making, is that there is a lot of truthfulness that we can be telling that actually builds solidarity and helps people eat the cabbage of wrong. And so love is really good, and I think let's not lose track of love because Stephen was quite right. We are all about love. You may have noticed I've been dropping the old hearts in the old chat. I don't drop thumbs up. We drop love into the chat. but it's about eating the cabbage of wrong. It's about being in solidarity, and it's about being truthful. And that shapes love into something that will change things. Anyway, you did ask.
Thank you, Kirsten. Robert, I know you put your hand back down, but did you want to come in anyway?
Yeah, thank you, Kirsten. That is and Kimmy and everyone sharing. I mean, I think solidarity is so important. Like solidarity, truth, and love. Like, that really gets to the heart of it, and certainly gets to the heart of like why I do the job that I do. And I think there's lots of different ways of getting change, and we need like a multiplicity of different approaches. But we also need to make sure that we act in solidarity and that we don't throw other people in our cause under the bus. And I think that is a risk, and I've seen that happen. Um, and this has been touched on, but we live in the UK with growing pressure to repress protest and civil action, and the role of campaign groups, which is all about squishing the space for people who are acting in solidarity and love and in truth. So I think that is really important. I'd add a fourth, which is hope. Like I think the world can feel like a pretty bleak place at times, and I, as a campaigner, think it's important as part of my job to think about hope and what is like realistic hope and what is realistic optimism while recognizing the context of things that are bad. Um, yeah, and I have a 7-month-old daughter, and so I think a lot about this at the moment. And I think about hope and solidarity and community and like what type of world are we building for her and for the rest of us. So yeah, sometimes I think certainly doing the type of perhaps more policy focused work that I do, it can all be up in the head, and it's just like important to bring it back down to the heart as well sometimes, or maybe all the time as well. So yeah, just want to add that as well.
Thanks a lot, Robert. And actually, just going back a little bit to policy and reflecting on something that Kimmy, you said, the need to link anti-imperialist struggle with class struggle in Britain. Um, I thought about something you said earlier, Robert, to support oil and gas workers out of those industries. That seems like a very tangible way also of doing that. Um, yeah, do you want to add anything on that?
I mean, just to say, we've got a campaign in Scotland called Our Power, which has got two kind of main elements. Like it's a coalition campaign, and part of it is around community and public ownership and control of renewable infrastructure that's going up, because a lot of communities in Scotland are seeing huge amounts of infrastructure, renewable infrastructure being built, and they're like, our bills are no lower. We have no control over this. We're not benefiting from it. So that's one. And then the second is working with workers to think about like how we can collectively build our power to demand good quality jobs for people. So yeah, just kind of like want to mention that, and I can drop a link in the chat if anyone is interested.
Cheers. Yes. Kirsten and Kimia, your hands are back up. Amazing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the work that's being done to help energy workers transfer out of the industry, I think has been amazing, and has been really inspiring. Some of the stuff that we've seen. It's one of we're going back to sort of truth and lies and stuff. One of the lies that we're being told at the moment is all of this military investment is going to lead to jobs. That's one of the things that they say. And there's two things you would say about that is all military spending comes from taxation, and that taxation falls heavily and disproportionately on the poorest workers. So you're essentially taking money from poor workers to pay for military expenditure to buy weapons. If you want to take money to pay for jobs, actually healthcare is much more efficient. Social care is much more effective. In fact, almost anything. I would argue that defense spending, in terms of creating jobs, is probably the least efficient way. If only because military assets don't produce anything. They don't produce anything. You're not investing in a factory. You're not getting somebody back into the workforce. You're not raising a child who'll then become a productive worker. in terms of and obviously education is not about turning people into productive workers, but you're not even doing that. All you're really doing is making stuff that blows up that actually destroys productive assets. So from a sheer economic perspective, we really do run the risk of getting into a kind of doom loop of a very militarized society that's a poorly performing economic society that then leads to essentially increased demands on funds just to pay the welfare bill that's going to, I'm afraid, affect a lot of the decarbonisation that work that we would all like to see, especially I'm going to say fair decarbonisation work that we would all like to see. So I think that's a a key thing to say. That's what I have on that particular thing.
Cheers. Hit me up. Go ahead.
I just wanted to quickly add, I think we should also be seriously thinking about public ownership. And I guess in the energy embargo for Palestine, we've been researching about making the case for the expropriation of energy companies that, they're fueling the genocide in Gaza, but like they're like headquartered and based in Britain and actually have like operations in the North Sea. So like what is our responsibility in Britain as people that are simultaneously, like impacted by this energy system? Um, and yeah, these energy companies are making like the same kind of profits from genocide in the global south. So yeah, I think yeah, we can't just like ask energy companies like as we all know to like invest in a renewable transition. I think we need this transition to like be led by workers and be informed by justice in the global south. And I think if anyone's interested in hearing more about like what our like expropriation campaign will look like please do get in touch and it would be great to talk about this more.
Awesome. Yeah. Do yes, feel free to send some stuff over to us when you've got it as well. Kirsten. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd definitely be up for reading that. Um, the point I was going to make, and I couldn't wear my hat as a nuclear information service chair without talking about this. By the way, small NGO, got 2 members of staff, but we look at nuclear policy, especially around nuclear weapons. I mean, one of but where it intersects with energy in particular, you will be told, and this goes back to the truthfulness again, you'll be told that nuclear is a vital part of decarbonizing our economy, that the current nuclear system is what it's all about. I think what you will find is it's not. I think what you'll find, and you can ask any of the military people, and they'll tell the same. The nuclear power system in this country is primarily intended to create weaponry. To produce the uranium, produce the plutonium that can be used in warheads. That's why we have it. That's what it's for. The more nuclear power you have, the more nuclear weapons you have, and vice versa. As nuclear power kind of drops away, Britain's ability to sustain its ambitions as a nuclear as a nuclear armed state have been diminishing. And in fact, many would say that actually it is not, in fact, a nuclear armed state anymore. It's really a client state of the US. It runs US technology. It happens to have some uranium that it puts in it and some technology to do that, but that's the limit of its capabilities. So yeah, I think let's definitely keep going with the renewables and let's exactly and let's never lose sight of the fact that nuclear power is primarily intended to fuel weaponry. And by the way, a lot of that cash we were talking about, that so-called defense investment plan, as I say, is nuclear investment. There was both direct nuclear investment in terms of nuclear submarines, the Vanguard submarines, but also investment in just these random naval bases, places like Faslane and Devonport, which are, so they said, nuclear submarine bases. They just are. So I think again, it's that kind of thing of let's understand some of the stuff that's going on. Remember, we're in solidarity with each other, and remember, we tell the truth. They don't. They don't play fair.
Kirsten. And yeah, actually, we had this on a Fuel for Thought a few sessions back. Not only is nuclear mainly for weapons production in the UK, but also we pay for it. So it actually, like you said before, obviously, we pay for all this stuff, and in fact, rather than lowering our bills, it makes them more expensive, contrary to what they would have us believe. It's 10 to 8. I'm going to invite everyone here to sort of give us some closing words. If you have any final pressing, urgent thoughts that you want to get out, now is the time. And where Kirsten, Robert, and Kim, you've been doing a lot of talking, which is brilliant. Thank you very much. And maybe we'll just close the session. Okay. Yes, Kirsten.
I'm aware I've said words. I'm going to just finish off by saying just a couple more words. It goes back to the hope stuff. It is so easy to lose hope. Uh, Again, I would argue that we live in a system that's designed to break solidarity, that's designed to tell us lies, and is designed to remove all hope. And yet, you know, every time I go out to a protest at an arms factory, every time, I've been outside the Farnborough arms fair this week with all the jets. You know, there's great stuff going on. There's people doing amazing things. There's little victories being achieved, whether that's cases being won in court, whether it's new campaigns starting up, all this sort of stuff. So if I can leave you with a final thing, which is guard your hope. Guard your hope. It may seem irrational, but I'm not sure who made this quote. There's all kinds of stuff about false news and false promises and false everything. There's no such thing as false hope. Genuinely, the kind of stuff that we're doing here, you can look back at a track record of win after win after win. We've not always going in the right direction. I would argue things are going in the wrong direction at the moment. But the forward progress that comes from the good sense of the people, from the solidarity and telling truth to each other and chewing on that cabbage of wrong, I think there's a great deal of hope in that.
Thank you. Yumia, and then Steve.
Yeah, and I think also to add, like when we talk about hope and optimism, like I actually derive a lot of my hope from, the steadfastness of, our siblings in the global south that are like continuing to resist like US imperialism and Zionism. Like if we look to Gaza, like as much as, like the Zionist occupation has kind of expanded its like genocidal war, and it's obviously been like devastating to watch. Like we still see like the steadfastness of Palestinians under siege, under genocide and siege in Gaza. We still see, the Lebanese, like of the south of Lebanon, like still adamant on like not leaving their land, like under the threat of Israeli occupation. And we see like the people of the global south, we see the people of Cuba, still like rising against US imperialist siege and like attempted collapse of the state. So I think we really need to derive our hope from like this existing and continued resistance of our siblings in the global south, and like actually like use that as our kind of compass on like what our resistance should look like in Britain, like how we need to continue resisting against state repression because and as like many prisoners for Palestine like in Britain have said this, like the conditions of repression that we face in Britain are a fraction of what like our siblings in Palestine go through. And I think that's exactly like the kind of grounding that we need on like where we should be deriving hope from. Because like our movement, like I believe our movement is winning and like it's a protracted struggle. And I think like that's what we should be kind of centering.
Thank you. Steve? Are you there, Steve?
Yeah, where do I get my hope from? Yesterday I had a wonderful experience. You might not be able to connect to it, or you might be able to connect to it. I'm not sure. I was walking in the centre of London, and I'd looked at the ground, and there was this little mouse. It was the middle of the day, and I've never seen in my life a little mouse. on the pavement in the centre of London, and it was absolutely beautiful. It was. I can't even capture with words how beautiful it was. To me, it was beautiful. My feelings just tell me that it was a beautiful little creature, magical creature, and it wasn't moving. It wasn't dead or hurt. It was. I googled why does a mouse why does a mouse not move or something like that, and the robot came back, the AI robot, and said when mice are scared, they stay still. So it was terrified of all these human beings, this little mouse, and I can see that same beauty, that exhilaration. I can get that same exhilaration out of seeing a cat or a bird or flowers and smelling the flowers. It's amazing, the scent of flowers, and it's nature's constancy. And even if somebody destroyed those flowers, you know, the smell will last through eternity, because it's not just a smell, it's something indescribable. And to me, hope comes from a place which you can't define. You can't say, oh, it's within these borders. Hope doesn't have borders. It escapes all borders. It flies. It dives into the sea. It lasts forever. Nothing can stop it, and it doesn't live on violence. And I think as long as we fuel ourselves and fuel each other with this intensity, this fuel, but a healthy fuel of hope, then we can't lose. And no one can lose. And it's not a fight. Everyone can win. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Steve. Much appreciated. Wonderful words to close the session on tonight. Thanks all of you for being here, for listening, participating. A special thank you to our speakers. Check out those final links that I put in the chat, where you can learn a little bit more about the Make Green Fair petition. And just a little reminder that we will be having a conference, Fuel Poverty Action Conference, in September on the 13th. So stay, just look out for some more information about that. Have a great night. Unmute yourselves, switch on your camera, give us a wave, and say night. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Take care, pals.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great
Thanks so much,
meeting.
all.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Inspiring stuff. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah.